Genesis. Good morning, church. My name's Madison. This is Haylee. We have the pleasure and honor to bring you the word this morning. Thank you, Tyler and Dana, for that amazing, beautiful worship that you led us in. It was so amazing. Haley's going to pray for us, and then we can get started with our message today.
Jesus, thank you so much for the opportunity to just to be in a place where you get to participate with you this morning. I pray just as we just sang, that you be lifted high, Jesus, within our hearts, within our minds, Jesus. May you add something to people's hearts this morning. May you continue to bring purification and refinement, Jesus, and speak through Madison and I as we teach this morning. We love you so much. In your name, amen.
Amen. We have been reading through Mark. So this week we are in Mark 8. We're going to do verses 1 through 13. So I'm just going to read our passage for you, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. So Mark 8, it's the story of Jesus feeding the 4,000. So in those days, when again a great crowd had gathered, and they had nothing to eat, he called his disciples to him and said to them, I have compassion on the crowd, because they have been with me now 3 days and have had nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way. And some of them have come from far away. And his disciples answered him, How can one feed these people with bread here in this desolate place? And he asked them, How many loaves do you have? They said 7. And he directed the crowd to sit down on the ground. And he took the 7 loaves, and having given thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to set before the people. And they set them before the crowd. They had a few small fish, and having blessed them, he said that these also should be set before them. And they ate, and they were satisfied. And they took up the broken pieces left over in 7 baskets full, and they were about 4,000 people. He sent them away, and immediately he got into the boat with his disciples and went to the district of Dalmanutha. Verse 11, the Pharisees came and began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him. And he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, Why does this generation seek a sign? Truly, I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation. And he left them, got into the boat again, and went to the other side. So as Haylee and I were studying and reading through this, we saw this passage broken into two different sections. One of Jesus teaching the crowd and his disciples, and the other one was Jesus talking with the Pharisees. If this story sounds familiar, that's because Chris and Dana talked about the feeding of the 5,000 just a few weeks ago. And now we see the feeding of the 4,000. So the story of the 5,000 likely took place in the territory of the Jews, and the story of the 4,000 is likely taking place in the territory of the Gentiles, which is significant because it's not just in one territory that Jesus is speaking to these people. Or a group of people that he's speaking to. He's speaking to the Jews, he's speaking to the Gentiles, to the crowd, to the disciples, to the Pharisees. And he's spreading this across the whole nation. And speaking in the presence of the Jews and the Gentiles together was offensive to their cultures and to those territories. That's not something that you did in that time. So we can see that Jesus is trying to bring us together, to bring unity among all the people. So we see the great characteristic of compassion shown through what Jesus is doing and how he treats the people that are following him. They've been traveling with him for 3 days, and they did not have anything to eat. Jesus sees the dedication and the willingness of his people, and he had compassion on them. This compassion that he shows is talking about a sympathy that Jesus feels for his people's sufferings. And he sees this, and he sees what they have given up to be with him, to follow him. They haven't complained. Maybe they brought some food to start the journey, but they probably didn't know they were going to be following Jesus for 3 days. And they're about to faint. But instead of Jesus just dismissing them and letting them go, he has great compassion and doesn't send them home, but he chooses to feed them. And the disciples start asking Jesus, how are you going to feed all these people in a desolate place with bread? And Jesus proceeds to say, to feed 4,000 people with 7 loaves of bread. And Jesus sends the people away after feeding them. And the disciples get into the boat and head to Dalmanutha. And as the disciples get in the boat, they're freaking out and worrying because they only brought 1 loaf of bread with them from the 7 leftover baskets that Jesus just multiplied. So at this point, we know that this miracle has come up a few times, like I said in the beginning, and in different variations. But we know that if Jesus repeats something, then he probably wants all of our attention. Mm-hmm. And each time there can be something we get out of it and something that he is choosing to tell us. Yeah. So this is important. Jesus wants them to see this miracle that he did and his provision, but the disciples and the Pharisees are so stuck in this mindset of scarcity, and they're in fear that they will not have enough. Jesus says that they are crazy and probably is thinking to himself, did they see what I just did back there when I fed the 4,000? And they're nervous that they only brought 1 loaf of bread on the boat with them. But Jesus is in the boat with them. And the disciples are fearing that they don't have enough. They got in the boat and they had no control over their situation. They didn't have enough food to last them probably even through a midday snack. But they had a mindset of lack, of scarcity, of wanting to keep for them, and of greed. And greed refers to an intense selfish desire, usually something of power, wealth, or food, to obtain that. Yeah. So as we're reading this and we see the reactions of the disciples, it should catch our attention, and it should already have our attention because Jesus is repeating it for some reason. So I want to talk with you guys about a few things that I just found I felt like Jesus wanted to bring to the community today. So a few things. Our scarcity mindsets that leave us greedy, our abundance of our own self and what we control and how that plays into greed. And when we begin to realize this brokenness, we can then offer ourselves up to wholeness. So we live in a culture that is very dependent on having, like the disciples. They wanted food. They didn't want just 1 loaf. They wanted 7 loaves, but they only brought 1. We live in a greedy culture. And this culture feeds into us that an abundance of things, possessions, fear, anxiety, worry, control is how we have to live. But the truth is, the little t, not the capital T, is that abundance manifests in greed. And this puts you in control of things of your life. And the way we grab for control is placing limits on ourselves, on God, on others, on our growth, our dreams, our passions, you name it. And when this happens, you feel as though there's something that's lacking in your life. And we try time and time again, but it's just like waves that keep hitting rocks, time after time. But really, this is our brokenness coming to the surface. And we can't address the greed, the control, and the longing to have in abundance unless we first discover and we are confronted with our own brokenness. Yes, it's scary, but let me remind you that the brokenness of ourselves it's a reality in our existence in this world. And the Father longs for us to see that there is never lack. Never. He never leaves us with nothing. He had 7 loaves of bread and fed 4,000 people and had 7 baskets left over. That is why that's why he laughed at the disciples when they got into the boat and they were freaking out that they only had 1 loaf of bread for their journey. Did they just see what Jesus did? There's no doubt that Jesus would have also done the same for the disciples in the boat if they needed anything at all. There is a shift that needs to take place from an abundance of greed to an abundance of Jesus. And he shows us the 7 baskets that were left over. He says, taste and see my abundance. And when we become friends with our brokenness and see it as a blessing, we will discover the true abundance of Jesus. I want to share with you a little bit about my own story, about discovering the abundance of Jesus in my grasping for control of my own life. So there was a time that I was literally trying to control anything that I could. my finances, how much I could save. So when I opened my bank account app on my phone, I felt good about myself and could pat myself on the back. How much I was helping others so that at the end of it, I could get something in return. Or if something changed in my schedule, it kind of just changed everything for me, and I felt debilitated almost. And how far could I move up in my job so that I could achieve the title of a manager, so when I told people what I did, I felt good. I'd wake up early in the mornings and spend time with Jesus, but just as much as I would want to. And I would pray, but just enough so I didn't hear God talking back to me, because he might change the plans that I had for my life. I wanted control. I wanted abundance for my life, but the source of that was from greed. So when I realized that there was something lacking, Jesus revealed the brokenness, but he didn't just leave it there. He also showed me what it would look like if there was a true abundance and a wholeness in him. So a few months before leading up to Thailand when we went last year, everything that I had control over was kind of stripped away from me. I quit my job. I raised money to go to Thailand. I was supposed to start an English class. I'd never done that before. I was supposed to live someplace for 2.5 months. I'd never been before. And I was going to come back to no job, no money, no stability, and either grow in a relationship that was super dear to my heart or lose it. And through this, he slowly started asking me the question, do you trust me enough to give me control? And I didn't just voluntarily give up those things that I just listed. It was made clear to me that this was where I was supposed to go. And even after saying no multiple times, probably twice a week, it wasn't a clear option. It was a clear option that is where I had to go. And through this, I found an abundance in Jesus. I released control and the greed that had built up over my own life, and began to taste abundance that he wanted to offer me. When we were driving to the airport, I got exactly the amount of money sent to me that we needed to live off of for 2.5 months. I wore the same shirt for same 4 t-shirts, 5 t-shirts for probably 2.5 months. I ate the same things pretty much every day, but I was satisfied when I laid my head to sleep down each night.
Beautiful.
And I got to teach women about their identity in Christ because of the ways Jesus had called me out of my own brokenness and into his abundance. I got to break bread with people around a table that brought unity, vulnerability, and healing. And I got to spend hours of my days being showered in his overwhelming love, his mercy, and his care. And I didn't have to worry about coming home, what it would be like. I had released trying to do my life on my terms and in my control. And when we find true abundance in Jesus, we can discover how much we have to give. Much more than we could have ever dreamed or imagined, because our life isn't our own to begin with. And he is calling us into an abundance that will leave us in awe, utterly amazed, and so filled up, lacking nothing at all, and more even to give, left over to give, like the 7 leftover baskets. And in Henry Nouwen's book, Life of the Beloved, he breaks it down into sections: taken, blessed, broken, and given. And he says, a quote in that book that I loved, it says, just as bread needs to be broken in order to be given, so do our lives. So I'm going to hand it over to Haylee, and she's going to talk a little bit about the Pharisees and their journey.
So good, sis. So good. Thanks for saying that. It really is so beautiful to see that a way that you've oriented your life towards Jesus, to allow him to speak and work through what he's brought you to do, you know, like not even in Thailand, not even in doing something outside of the country, but to see the ways that you have lived your life that way, you know, in the simple everyday things. And that is what Madison and I want to offer to our community, like that we think Jesus is saying through this passage is he's after a change of heart, he's after our hearts, he's after just really wanting to bless us with the fullness that he has for us. And so thank you for sharing your story about that. That's so good. So I'm going to continue working through this passage. And as we continue reading, we see that right after these baskets are filled with leftover fish and loaves of bread, the Pharisees' first response is to come, and it says they begin to argue with Jesus, seeking a sign from heaven to test him. The Message version says, when they arrived, the Pharisees came out and started in on him, badgering him to prove himself, pushing him against a wall. How crazy that the Pharisees' immediate response to Jesus' generosity and compassion is disbelief, defensive. They're demanding more right away. They can't even see the abundance that Jesus has for them because their hearts are so hardened, because they are just seeking for so much more. They cannot even accept what Jesus has given them. And he's literally right in front of them. And nevertheless, they're not even able to participate in what Jesus is doing. So how often is this me? I felt so confronted with that this week. How often am I trying to have control of a situation? How often do I worry about not having enough, or worry about being left behind, or worry about what something's going to look like and try to figure out what the next step is going to be? It definitely is a part of the way I live my life. And Jesus' response, it says he sighs deeply in his spirit, because the Pharisees are missing it, and sometimes we just miss it. And Jesus isn't necessarily asking for us to understand. The disciples don't even fully understand who Jesus is, but he's asking for a change of heart. And it's so neat that this story is sandwiched between the healing of the deaf man and the healing of the blind man, like Chris taught on last week. Stories of Jesus opening up people's ears to hear, opening up people's eyes to see. Be opened, he says. And we really feel like this passage is one that Jesus is speaking to our hearts. Be opened. Come see what I'm doing. Come accept what I have for you. And so he's really up to something here, and the disciples and the Pharisees respond differently. The disciples are the ones that, even though they don't understand, even as Madison was saying, like, how are you going to feed all of these people, Jesus? They still bring what they have. They still bring their loaves and their fish, and they get to participate in the miracle. They get to be the ones that are handing out the bread as it's being multiplied, because their hearts are open, even if they don't fully understand. And they get to participate in what's going on. So often when our hearts are hardened, again, whether it be we're concerned with just being right, or we're trying to have control, or we're trying to make sure that we have enough, or we're just waiting for something to look the way we think it should look in order for us to participate, we're just going to miss out. And again, the Lord just has so much for us to bless us with, and our hearts have to be in the right place to receive what he has for us in the fullness. Tyler and I were recently hanging out with some friends and just catching up on all things COVID and quarantine and how that's been. And they were just sharing with us about how bitter and angry their hearts had been towards their jobs, towards where they had to live during this time. And they were sharing with us about this realization of the reality of where their hearts were, and how they were confronted with this hardness and this bitterness of every day coming home from work or from different places, and just being so angry and frustrated with where they're at in their lives. And they were sharing with us about how they felt so convicted about just how their hearts were being oriented towards the Lord. And so they said, I think we need to change our hearts in order to see what the Lord is doing right now, because the way that our hearts are pointed towards Jesus is not allowing us to see the ways that he's working, even in our horrible jobs, or even into situations that we don't want to be in right now. And so they decided to start reading the Psalms and just doing a number of different things to really orient their lives and be more intentional about the ways that they were seeking Jesus. And I left hanging out with them feeling like, wow, like it was just incredible. The scriptures were oozing out of them. Just a life of purity and integrity and gratitude was just oozing off of them. And when you're faced with that, you want to live like that. When you hear Madison's story of like you're driving to the airport and you get met and someone meets the need exactly of the financial need that you'll need to have to be in Thailand for 2 months. There's something in my heart that just goes, I want that. I want to be in a place where the Lord can fully bless me. I want to be in a place where I'm so dependent on him that I'm driving to the airport and the Lord meets my needs. And we really do believe that the Lord wants to bless us, that he wants to bless us with the fullness of what he has. And when we're confronted with stories like that, sometimes it makes us almost more aware of the areas of our life that aren't aligned with that. Areas of our life that are hard or bitter. I left that time with friends and felt like, oh my gosh, I need to treat Tyler better, or I need to love Tyler better. Or you become more aware with parts of your heart that aren't aligned towards or aren't ready to receive what the Lord has for us. And that's the Pharisees here. Their response is, Jesus, we didn't like how you did that, so can you do something else? Can you show us a sign? Or can you give us something else? And they're not ready or able to receive what he's already done for them. And so they miss out. They really do. And they're not able to fully accept what he has for them. Another story, about 6 or 7 months into marriage with Tyler, we were really struggling in accepting our sexuality and accepting why sex is a good thing and why it's a good gift to get to experience together. And just based on past experiences and how we thought things should be 6 or 7 months in, or where we thought we should be, we're just feeling so frustrated and bitter and having a really hard time understanding why sex is such a good gift and understanding why our sexuality is something to celebrate and something that can even lead us into more intimacy and closeness. We were really struggling with that, struggling to accept that good gift that the Lord had for us. And after some time, a day or two spent in prayer with Jesus, just felt like Tyler reminded us of Jesus' teachings when he says, you can't put new wine into old wineskins, because the wineskin's going to burst and the new wine's going to be destroyed. It's going to go all over the floor. And in our own life, we were trying to put this new gift into these old wineskins. We were trying to experience this new blessing with past beliefs or an expectation of the world, or just we weren't able to experience the fullness of what the Lord had for us because our hearts weren't in a place where we were ready to receive it. And don't get me wrong, Jesus can definitely speak to a hard heart. He is completely capable to override our bitterness and hardness of heart and still speak. But the truth is I think we're really gonna miss out on the fullness that he has for us if our hearts aren't ready and open to receive what he has for us. And so he really is after your heart. How often are we just concerned with having control? How often are we so consumed with trying to make sure that things look the way we want them to before we participate in them? Or how often are we concerned or worrying that if there's going to be enough or not, if we're going to have enough finances, food, money for rent, whatever it might be, or that we're going to be left behind if we can't protect or preserve what we have. Psalms 51:10 says, create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit in me. And so just some questions that we want to reflect upon this morning. How are you putting yourself in a place to receive what the Lord has for you right now? What are the ways the Lord is seeking for your heart to be opened? What areas is he speaking be opened into your heart? So Tyler's going to come and play a song for us as we just have some time to respond and let the Lord speak. Madison's going to read a few more verses, so may the Lord speak to you, and we'll play some music.
Yeah, those are such good questions to think about as we process and respond as Tyler plays a song for us. I wanted to read two more passage or just little verses of scripture over you as we start worship. One is Psalms 36, 7 through 9. How precious is your steadfast love, O God. The children of mankind take refuge in the shadow of your wings. They feast on the abundance of your house, and you give them drink from the river of your delights. In Proverbs 3:10, it says, Then your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will be bursting with wine. So what are the ways the Lord is seeking for your heart to be opened? And how is God challenging you to live your life in abundance of Him?